Good afternoon, everyone. It is David Schlotthauer here, back with another detailed tropical weather outlook and discussion for Tuesday, July 8th, 2025. In this tropical weather update, we're going to give you the latest update on the Gulf, as there is the possibility of tropical development in the next 1 to 3 weeks here. We're also going to give you the latest update here in the Caribbean, the Southwestern Atlantic, and the main development region, as we are monitoring stronger tropical wave potential as we go into the very end of July into early August. Now, if you haven't been here before and you do like these detailed tropical weather outlook and discussion videos on a daily basis, including live stream coverage on tropical systems, please don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that bell notification icon so you get notified every time I do go live on the tropics or make videos on the tropics. Hit that like button, give that like a huge nudge, and also please leave a comment in the section below this video so that way I know if you did like today's video. Now, to start off the video, here's a look at the latest GOES 19 true color visible satellite imagery provided by Dr. Levi Cowan at tropicaltidbits.com. There will be a link in the description below this video where you can check out his website. So here's a look at the imagery, and we can clearly see there is a lot of dry, warm, dusty Saharan air that is coming off of Africa. There's a nice good plume here of stratocumulus in the lower levels, denoting where that dry, stable, warm air actually is located. And this is a suppression of any thunderstorms that have been really lacking out here over the last couple of weeks. And that is going to continue for another week or two as we have a lot of sinking, drying, and warming over here in the central main development region. Over here in the Caribbean, we are looking at nice conditions, although there is some convective popcorn-like clouds that have popped up this afternoon due to a little weak upper level low pressure system. And then of course over here in the Gulf, looking nice and dry, although there is some showers and thunderstorms that have developed this afternoon, but nothing compared to with what is going to possibly be happening in the next 1 to 2 weeks, as the global tropical hazards outlook did highlight this area with a low chance of tropical development, which we will be taking a look here in just a little bit. Another way we could visualize this is by looking at the total precipitable water imagery here, just like a satellite version, but only we're just looking at the water in the atmosphere, no clouds involved. This is pure water, okay? So when we look at this, you can see there is a lot of dry air coming off of Africa, also across the Mediterranean Sea, where we have a lot of dry air in place there. And that is a problem, because what ends up happening is the intertropical convergence zone is way down here, much further south than it should be for this time of the year. And I'll show you proof of that. We also have a lot of dry air moving across the Caribbean, again, due to a lot of stability problems, lots of sinking in the atmosphere. And then, of course, in the Gulf, where we do have elevated amounts of water, but this is nothing compared to with what it could end up being in a rising motion in the atmosphere, where we get a lot of upward lift. Okay. So overall, right now, much of the deep tropics here looking nice and dry and stable, but that's not going to last for too much longer. I can promise you that. Here's another way we could visualize what the lower parts of the atmosphere are currently doing by looking at our low-level vorticity plot here. This is showing us how much spin there is at 5,000 feet above the surface. And we have a couple of futures. Here is what is left with Chantal, no longer a system at all on the NHC map, but this is currently moving off towards the northeast at a pretty quick speed. Yesterday it was way over here, and now it has moved that much. So I expect it's going to be somewhere over here by tomorrow, and it's going to be absorbed into the westerlies for sure. But there's another area of disturbed weather that is located over here over the Bahamas. Now, the NHC does not have any highlighted area on this, but it is worth noting here on the plot because there is a little bit of spin, a little bit of vorticity. And this is going to eventually march its way towards the Gulf over the next 3 to 5 days. Perhaps it may take a little longer than that. And we all know how warm the Gulf actually is. And then, of course, out here in the Caribbean and the main development region, we are not seeing any discerned areas of spin that is organized enough to determine if it's a tropical wave or not. Maybe a really weak tropical wave right here, but man, that is pretty far south for early to mid-July standards. Looking at the deep layer vertical wind shear profile right now, currently, this is as of the 18Z output, and what we have here is definitely a lot of unfavorable conditions in the Caribbean across portions of the subtropical Atlantic. That's this area that I've circled in white for you all to easily see. And this is vertical wind shear greater than 30 to 40 knots. So pretty dang strong, especially over here in the Caribbean. But where that area of vorticity actually is located, look at the deep layer vertical wind shear, generally under 5 to 10 knots, which is quite favorable for tropical development. And that is why I think this has an opportunity here, a non-zero chance that this does develop into something down the road, perhaps in the next 5 to 7 days. And we can clearly see why the global tropics hazardous outlook from the Climate Prediction Center is highlighting that area across the central and northern Gulf over the next couple of weeks. And this is that area. There is a 20% chance that there is going to be the possibility of tropical development off the southeastern coast of Texas, southern portion there of, say, if you are in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and across much of the west coast of Florida, including for the Big Bend. And this is for July 16th all the way through the 22nd. Whereas week 3, there are no discerned areas to monitor out there. Now, with that being said, here's a look at the latest GFS model for this afternoon on your Tuesday. And this is a 3-plot system showing us what we're looking at. So the color shading here, basically there is what is left with Chantal off of Nova Scotia, Canada. Down to the south of that, we have this nice sprawling ridge of high pressure. You can tell by the height lines. So the height lines tell us where there's a ridge of high pressure and where there isn't a ridge of high pressure. And then, of course, our wind barbs tell us which way the wind is blowing from and how strong it is. So we have a cyclonic or anticyclonic circulation like this, where we have a little bit of a dry skeletal type tropical wave that has come off of Africa with some westerly winds that are doing something like this. So our intertropical convergence zone is more like this right now, where it is pretty darn stable for what it's worth here in early July. So putting this into motion here throughout the day tomorrow, you can see the ridge is still there. Nothing has changed here on the model, although there is what is left with Chantal. Goodbye, Chantal, our third named storm of the season. And then over the next 4 days, pretty much nothing has changed at all. Now, there's that little disturbance that is right in here. Yes, you can see a little bit of a pinch with the height contour, but when we put that into motion, thing kind of disintegrates on the GFS and it just stretches thin. So therefore, we're not really expecting much with that, but you just never know. It only takes a bit of persistence of deep convection to cause things to develop. But there's a lot of dry air, which is helping from that of developing. So now going into the next 5 to 7 days, really nothing to really monitor. However, though, I am watching an area here over Florida. So it's going to come off of another frontal boundary, and it's actually going to develop here and retrograde, and it's going to do something like that. So you can see it here as we move forward. It kind of retrogrades and develops there in the Gulf. Now, while this is a broad circulation, we have to understand this is pretty far out. So we're looking out to 8 to 9 to even almost 10 days into the future here on the 17th of July. So this is a week from this coming Thursday, in other words, because my eye appointment is actually on the 10th of July. So 7 days after that, we have, an area that we will need to monitor. And that's what the Global Tropical Hazards Outlook was showing. Then that goes on by, and that, it just kind of hangs out over there, just kind of stalls out. So we will need to monitor that in future model runs to see how that pans out. But if you've noticed down here, pretty much shut down. Strong trade winds return again. I mean, the trade winds here over the Caribbean are anywhere between 25 to 35 knots. That's almost 40 miles an hour. So, I mean, man, that's pretty dang stable. Even out here in the Eastern Pacific, very stable for the latter part of July. And it might not be until now, early August, when things might change. We'll see. I've been saying that for a while, and the models still surprise us. The Canadian model is also agreeing with the GFS with that future that develops in the Northern Gulf. And we can see that here on the GIM model, or the CMC, or known as the Canadian. And as we move forward here in the next 180 hours, nothing out there, but look at that future. You can see it right here, really broad in nature, and then it retrogrades, and it does try to develop here. You can see a little bit of a vorticity signature there in Mobile, Alabama at day 10, which is Friday, the 18th of July, and then another area here on the Canadian. But notice out here, the MDR is shut down for business at least over the next 10 days. Now, the last model that we want to look at here is the European model. This is the deterministic forecast, and this is the more accurate version, I would say, amongst our other global models. And this is pretty aggressive, but very far out. It's showing that disturbance here in the Gulf. In fact, because of that, let's actually zoom on in across the Gulf of Mexico briefly here. Let's see if we can bring that up here right now. So you can see winds are going to remain very light, but watch what happens here. This is 5 days out. This is about 7 days out. Nothing unusual, right? But look what happens here towards the end of the model run. We have a weak disturbance here, but then a more stronger disturbance does try to develop towards the very end. Now, of course, the European model is very conservative. It's very accurate. So this is bear watching in future model runs. Will the European model continue to show this? Because look what happens. It does develop, and you can see definitely a close circulation here with winds of about 32 knots. That would equal to, let's see, in miles per hour, that is about 36 to 40 miles an hour. So yeah, we definitely need to watch this area, and it goes in line. This is the 23rd of July. Look what happens through the 22nd. We have that low chance. So it is in the realm of possibility that this future does exist. But the good news is it's just one model run known as a deterministic forecast, and the ensembles are not picking that up at least over the next 7 days. And I did check out to 16 days. There is nothing out here in the Gulf. So we will need to monitor that, though, especially since it's on a deterministic forecast, and we'll see if our ensembles follow suit with that. But right now, looking nice and good here in the Gulf, in the Caribbean, and in the MDR with only a couple of low-end tracks. I mean, those are very weak disturbances that I'm not concerned about by any means. So looking good out there in the next 7 days. And then, of course, on our GEFS ensemble forecast, nothing also that rings a bell at all. Here in the Gulf, nice and clean. Also nice and clean over here in the Caribbean and in the MDR, which is great news to see through at least the next 7 days, or throughout the next, or through, I should say, the 15th of July. And because of that, the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida is not expecting any tropical development over the next 7 days or week. This is the first time we have seen a clean blank image in a while, so it's nice to see this. So good news for those people that are traveling around the United States or even in the tropics. Looking good, good, good. So with that all out of the way, by looking at our global computer models, it is time to shift gears and look now at what's happening behind the scenes in the tropics, because this right here, folks, is really, really important, and it gives us an idea how the tropics are behaving over Western and Eastern and Central Africa, where our tropical waves come off of, usually during the month of August, September, and very early October. So what we're seeing right now, as of the ending period of June 21st all the way through the 30th, we can see that the intertropical convergence zone has been further south. I mean, pretty much since mid-April, all right, where it was very far south in May, and it is still pretty far south than it should be for this time of the year. This is very important because that means there's been a lot of sinking in the deep tropics of Africa, where the MJO is not very active. So we've seen a very suppressive phase. And so that is why we're not seeing much in the way of tropical development. And in fact, if you draw a line from here all the way to here, basically our ITCZ is so far south that it replicates basically mid to late May. In other words, this is not a favorable optimal position for the intertropical convergence zone to fan off any tropical waves right now. So we will see, does this remain further south than its normal position? Or does this make up and does it go further north than it should be like we had last year? That is a very important question. And unfortunately, we don't really have the answer, but there are signs that will change as we go into early August. As we look at the western mean position of the intertropical convergence zone, this is also further south than it should be for this time of the year. And again, if this were further north, then we would probably see more tropical waves, more aggressive ones like we had with Beryl. But because this is further south than it should be, the background state is quite stable. That's why in the first place, this is further south than it should be. So when we take a look at the map here over Africa, where our breeding ground or our tropical wave machine actually happens at, we can see the red line here denotes the current 10-day average positioning of the intertropical convergence zone. And pretty much the entire area is further south than it should be versus where the black line actually is. So I hope you all can see that really well. And you might look at this and be like, David, that's not much at all further south than it should be. It really is. It makes a huge difference because this tells us that, okay, our trade winds have been stronger than normal over northern Africa and over the Atlantic over the last 10 days. And that's why this is happening. But as we go into July, we will see if this actually moves north to where it should be and maybe surpass that. Because last year, the ITF was actually over here more so likely. Okay, so it was definitely a lot further north than it was this year. I know it seems like a little difference, but it means a lot. It really does. Now, with that out of the way, let's take a look now at our MJO phase diagram example from Eric Webb here on X, or formerly known as Twitter. And what we're seeing here is basically which areas or phases of the MJO give the Atlantic a boost in tropical activity. So there are three plots here. First of all, this is the MJO RMM phase diagram. This is pretty important to understand because it gives us an idea what parts of the tropics are seeing a lot of favorability for tropical convergence, where we get these tropical waves developing into tropical storms or hurricanes. And then the top left is tropical track intensity and density as well. And so the blue anomalies indicate below average density. So that means an inactive area in the tropics, especially with phase 6. And then the bottom right image right here denotes a Mercator projection of what areas in green, brown, green again are seeing sinking and rising motion. And you'll see over Africa, there's a lot of sinking motion in phase 6. That's where the MJO is going to amplify, and you'll see that here. So as we put this into motion here, phase 7, usually a very inactive period in the tropics, all right? And that's because, again, a lot of sinking over Africa, over the Indian Ocean, moving into Indonesia. And then you can see as we go forward here, even so there's a lot of rising motion in the velocity potential anomaly, this is actually a very suppressive phase still in the deep tropics of the Atlantic. This lags behind up to 10 to 14 days. So you might think that, oh, a lot of favorability, there's rising motion. We should see a lot of activity. This actually is delayed by 2 weeks or up to 2 weeks in extreme cases, depending on the speed of the MJO propagation. And then usually in phase 2 is when things get heated, especially in the Caribbean and the Gulf, as well as the Western Atlantic. And that's because look at what we have over Africa, lots of rising motion and then sinking motion approaching the Eastern Pacific. And then usually it is when we get into phase 3 and 4. That's where it's really busy for the Gulf, for the Caribbean, and over the main development region. And that's because our MJO is in Indonesia, in the Western Pacific, the maritime continent, including for Africa. So I hope that really clears up the confusion on what we're about to look at here. So with that being said, let's take a look at our latest MJO phase diagram, because this is very important and it really matches with what we just looked at. So right now, the MJO has been in this wander of no activity. There's been a lot of variability, other competing factors like Rossby wave activity, as well as a very incoherent MJO signal in the RMM guidance, as well in the objective OLR anomaly filtering. But what's going to end up happening is that we're going to develop more of a wave 1 asymmetry pattern that is going to allow the MJO to get out of its unit of circle for the first time in nearly a couple of months, which has been the result of a very inactive close down season so far in June and now into July in the main development region. And so this is going to leap into phases 5 and 6, which is generally neutral to unfavorable conditions. But I do expect once this gets back into phases 1, depending on how amplified this will remain, is to be fruition or to be announced. Because if it remains amplified and if it can get here fast enough, usually by the middle to the end of August, we can see a huge burst of activity in the deep tropics of the Atlantic. And we can see this too on the European ensemble forecast, also highlighting a very active, more coherent MJO signal with less convective coupled Kelvin wave activity. You can see it right here, the starting point, and then it gets out of its unit of circle and then it swings over into phases 6 and 7 by the latter part of July, with some ensemble members indicating a very, very highly amplified charged version of the MJO. We can also see this through the objective filtering of our OLR and velocity potential anomalies here from the University of North Carolina, showing us that areas in brown usually indicate a lot of sinking, but not always. It depends on what happens with that. But usually you get a lot of equatorial Rossby wave activity, so that you get localized sinking cells that develop. But what's going to end up happening by the time we go into the middle to the end of July, because the MJO is one factor of tropical variability, there's other variables that come into hand. And one of those is localized forcing, and that's done successfully by our convective coupled Kelvin wave activity. So we have one little short version coming through at least the 21st of July, and then another one by early August. And that is why I think early August needs to be watched a little closely, especially over the Caribbean and across the Western MDR, especially just east of 60 degrees west in longitude. That is because, again, we have another potential phase up with the convective coupled Kelvin wave timed a little bit right with a very weak MJO signal propagation that is over here in the Atlantic. Now, sea surface temperatures are quite elaborate here in this video, and what I mean by that is we definitely have a signal that does ask for a mixed signal of the hurricane season once it gets active, or if it's backloaded. But what we do have indeed is definitely a differential in the basins here, where we do have a very negative PMM structure that is located off of California. This is known as the Pacific Meridional Mode. So it's in its negative phase, its cold phase right now. We have a weak warm tongue of warm neutral conditions in the Eastern Pacific with another cool tongue here. This is known as the Pacific Southern Annular Mode, and that is also negative. So as a whole, despite this warm neutral phase that we have in the Eastern Pacific, The whole basin as a whole is running significantly below average, about a quarter to maybe a degree below normal overall in this basin, versus relatively speaking, the Atlantic is running well above normal in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies here in the MDR, as well as the subtropical region of the Atlantic running far above average. In fact, some temperature anomalies here in around Bermuda are running up to 3 degrees warmer than they should be for this time of the year, including for the Gulf, running about 1 to 2 degrees warmer than it should be for early July. But now that warm tongue off the Eastern Pacific isn't going to last for too much longer, and that's because we have a very enhancement of the trade winds that are going to resume their normal activity across the international dateline and also to the east across 120 degrees west in longitude. So that's in the Eastern Pacific, and we could see some pretty intense trade winds at the surface, anywhere between 20 to 35 miles an hour, possibly even locally stronger, and that's going to really help to drive up some upwelling of cooler water off of Peru over the next 1 to 3 weeks. And we will see how that develops, because boy, this is some very strong trade winds here over the Eastern Pacific. Also, the Atlantic is looking at weaker winds in the short term, but there is another amount of stronger than normal trade winds that are going to be resuming as we go into the latter part of July. But anyways, if you found this tropical weather outlook and discussion very helpful, detailed, and informative, please don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you are new and you do like these updates. If you haven't even been here before and you're very new, please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification icon so you get my daily tropical weather updates and discussions, including live stream updates as well. And also, please hit that like button. Give this video a huge thumbs up if you did like it, and leave a comment in the section below this video. As always, I'll be back with you more tomorrow with another detailed tropical weather outlook and discussion.